The evening sun painted the narrow streets of Rome in golden light as Antonio wiped down the last table in his small restaurant. The smell of garlic and basil still hung in the air, but the dining room was almost empty now. Just one elderly couple finishing their pasta in the corner, and a young man scrolling through his phone while nursing a glass of wine. Antonio let out a quiet sigh as he looked around his family's restaurant. The checkered tablecloths were the same ones his grandmother had chosen 40 years ago. The walls were covered with old photos of family gatherings, wedding celebrations, and birthday parties. In the corner sat his grandfather's old piano, covered with a thin layer of dust. Nobody had played it in months. This wasn't how he had imagined running the family business. When his grandfather passed away 3 years ago, Antonio thought he could keep the restaurant thriving just like the old man had. But times were different now. People had less money to spend on dining out. The big chain restaurants were offering cheaper meals. Tourism was down, and the locals who used to come every week were showing up less and less. He walked to the cash register and counted the day's earnings. 43 euros. That was barely enough to cover the cost of ingredients for tomorrow's lunch special. The rent was due next week, and he still owed money to his vegetable supplier. His wife kept suggesting he sell the place and find a regular job, but this restaurant was all he knew. His grandfather had built it from nothing, and his father had worked here every day until he retired. The young man with the wine glass got up to leave, dropping a few coins on the table as a tip. Antonio nodded and smiled, but inside he felt worried. At this rate, he might have to close down by Christmas. The thought made his stomach turn. What would he tell his family? What would happen to the few loyal customers who still came by? As he was stacking chairs on tables, preparing to close for the night, he heard a gentle knock on the glass door. A young woman stood outside looking uncertain. She appeared to be in her early 20s with long black hair and a large backpack slung over her shoulders. She was clearly a tourist, probably lost or looking for directions. Antonio almost pretended not to see her. He was tired, and dealing with lost tourists was the last thing he wanted to do right now. But something about the way she stood there, shifting nervously from foot to foot, made him change his mind. His grandmother had always taught him to be kind to strangers. He walked to the door and opened it. "We're closed," he said in English, pointing to the sign. "But if you need directions, I can help." The young woman looked relieved that he spoke English. She had a small phrase book in her hand and seemed to be struggling with Italian. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said softly. "I saw the piano inside through the window. I was wondering." She paused, clearly nervous about what she was going to ask. Antonio glanced back at the old piano.
What about it?
"I'm traveling and I don't have much money left. I was wondering if maybe I could play something for you in exchange for some food. Just something simple, maybe some bread or pasta. I haven't eaten since this morning." Antonio looked at her more carefully. Her clothes were clean but worn, and her backpack looked heavy. She had the tired look of someone who had been walking around the city all day. Her request reminded him of the street musicians he sometimes saw near the tourist areas, playing for coins. He almost said no. The last thing he needed was some amateur tourist banging away on his grandfather's precious piano. But then he thought about his earlier worries about money and customers. Maybe having some music in the restaurant wouldn't be such a bad thing. At worst, she would play a simple song. He would give her a plate of leftover pasta and she would be on her way. "You can really play?" he asked. She nodded eagerly. "Yes, I've been playing since I was very young." Antonio shrugged. Why not? The day had already been disappointing and he had nothing to lose. "Okay," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "But just one song and then some food." "Deal?" Her face lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much. You're very kind." As she walked toward the piano, Antonio couldn't help but smile a little. She reminded him of his own daughter, who was studying abroad and probably asking strangers for help in foreign countries too. The least he could do was show some hospitality. He watched as she carefully set down her backpack and approached the old piano. She ran her fingers gently over the keys as if greeting an old friend. Antonio went back to cleaning up, expecting to hear some basic melody in a few minutes. Maybe Happy Birthday or some popular song that tourists always seem to know. He had no idea that his life was about to change completely. He had no idea that this tired-looking young woman with the heavy backpack was about to turn his struggling restaurant into the most talked-about place in the neighborhood. All he knew was that he had decided to be kind to a stranger, just like his grandmother had taught him. As he wiped down the counter, he heard her adjusting the piano bench. The old instrument hadn't been tuned in months, but it still held its notes reasonably well. His grandfather had always taken good care of it, even when nobody was playing it regularly. Antonio continued his closing routine, only half paying attention to the young woman at the piano. He was thinking about tomorrow's menu and wondering if he should try to negotiate with his suppliers for better prices. The restaurant business was harder than he had ever imagined, and every day felt like a struggle to keep his head above water. But in just a few moments, everything was going to change. The tired tourist with the heavy backpack was about to show him something that would transform not just his restaurant, but his entire understanding of what was possible when people took chances on each other. Yuki sat on the old piano bench and took a deep breath. The restaurant was quiet except for the soft clinking of dishes as Antonio continued cleaning up. She could feel his eyes on her occasionally, probably wondering what kind of music she was going to attempt on his grandfather's instrument. She pressed a few keys gently, testing how they felt under her fingers. The piano was old and some keys were slightly out of tune, but it had a warm, rich sound that reminded her of the practice rooms back home in Japan. For a moment, she felt a wave of homesickness wash over her. It had been 3 months since she had played a real piano. 3 months since she had left everything behind to travel across Europe with just her backpack and her dreams. Back in Tokyo, she had been known as one of the most promising young pianists of her generation. She had won competitions, performed in concert halls, and studied with the best teachers in the country. But when her father lost his job and her family faced financial troubles, she had made the difficult decision to pause her musical career. The money she had saved for advanced music studies became the fund for this European journey, her last adventure before returning home to find work and help support her family. She hadn't told Antonio any of this. To him, she was just another backpacker looking for a free meal, and maybe that was better. She didn't want pity or special treatment. She just wanted to play music again, even if it was just for one person in a small restaurant. Yuki placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She had chosen one of her favorite pieces, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. It was a piece that always made her feel both sad and hopeful at the same time, which seemed perfect for how she was feeling right now. The first notes filled the small restaurant like honey spreading through warm bread. Antonio stopped wiping the counter and turned around, his eyebrows raised in surprise. This wasn't what he had expected at all. The melody was beautiful and complex, flowing from her fingers with an ease that made it look effortless. As Yuki continued playing, something magical happened in the little restaurant. The elderly couple in the corner stopped their quiet conversation and turned to listen. The young man who had been about to leave sat back down, his phone forgotten on the table. Even the sounds from the kitchen seemed to quiet down, as if the whole building was holding its breath to listen to the music. Antonio found himself walking closer to the piano, drawn by the incredible sounds coming from the old instrument. He had heard his grandfather play jazz standards and Italian folk songs on this same piano years ago, but he had never heard anything like this. The young woman's fingers moved across the keys with perfect precision, but there was also something deeply emotional in her playing. It was as if she was telling a story without words. The music seemed to transform the entire atmosphere of the restaurant. The warm yellow lights looked softer somehow. The photos on the walls seemed to smile down more kindly. Even the old checkered tablecloths looked more elegant in the glow of the music. Antonio felt like he was seeing his family's restaurant through new eyes. As Yuki played, she forgot about her empty stomach and her dwindling money. She forgot about her worries about the future and her sadness about leaving her musical dreams behind. For these few minutes, she was just a musician, sharing her gift with people who appreciated it. This was why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the competitions or the recognition, but for moments like this when music created a connection between strangers. The nocturne reached its most beautiful section, where the melody soared above gentle rolling accompaniment. Yuki's hands moved with the confidence of someone who had practiced this piece thousands of times, but her expression showed that she was still discovering new emotions in the music. This was the mark of a true artist, someone who could play a familiar piece and make it feel fresh and alive. Antonio watched in amazement as the young woman brought his grandfather's piano back to life. He remembered how the old man used to say that a piano wasn't just a piece of furniture, It was a living thing that needed to be played to stay healthy. Looking at this scene now, Antonio finally understood what his grandfather had meant. The few customers in the restaurant were completely captivated. The elderly man reached across the table to hold his wife's hand, both of them smiling as they listened. The young man had put away his phone entirely and was leaning forward in his chair, not wanting to miss a single note. As the piece approached its ending, Yuki allowed herself to add small personal touches to the music, tiny changes in timing and dynamics that made the performance uniquely hers. This was something that separated great musicians from good ones, the ability to make even the most famous pieces feel personal and immediate. The final notes of the nocturne rang out in the restaurant, hanging in the air like the last rays of sunlight at the end of a perfect day. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of appreciation and wonder. Then the elderly couple began to clap, and the young man joined in enthusiastically. Antonio found himself applauding too, his hands moving almost automatically as his mind tried to process what he had just witnessed. This wasn't just good music. This was extraordinary music. The kind of performance that people paid lots of money to hear in concert halls. Yuki turned around on the piano bench, her cheeks slightly flushed from the emotion of playing. She looked surprised by the applause, as if she had forgotten that anyone else was in the room. "Thank you," she said quietly to Antonio. "Your grandfather's piano is beautiful. It has a wonderful sound." Antonio stared at her, still trying to understand what had just happened. This young woman who had knocked on his door asking for food in exchange for music wasn't just some amateur tourist. She was clearly a trained musician, probably with years of serious study behind her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. Yuki smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. "I studied music in Japan. But that was before." She trailed off, not wanting to explain her whole story to this kind stranger. The elderly couple approached them, the woman's eyes bright with excitement. "That was incredible, dear," she said to Yuki in accented English. "We've been coming to this restaurant for 20 years and we've never heard anything so beautiful." Antonio looked around his restaurant and saw it transformed. The music had created something special here, something that he had never experienced in all his years of running the family business. For the first time in months, he felt hopeful about the future. The next morning, Antonio woke up thinking about the piano music. He had barely slept, his mind replaying the beautiful sounds that had filled his restaurant the night before. After giving Yuki a generous plate of pasta and some bread for her journey, he had watched her disappear into the Roman night, wondering if he would ever see her again. As he prepared for another day at the restaurant, Antonio couldn't stop thinking about how different the atmosphere had felt with music. The elderly couple had stayed an extra hour, ordering dessert and another bottle of wine while talking excitedly about the performance. The young man had asked if there would be music again tomorrow. Even Antonio himself had felt more energetic and hopeful than he had in months. Around noon, as Antonio was preparing the lunch special, he heard a familiar knock on the glass door. He looked up to see Yuki standing outside, her backpack still on her shoulders but her expression more confident than the night before. Antonio opened the door with a smile. "You came back," he said. "I was hoping maybe we could make an arrangement," Yuki said, her English clearer now that she wasn't tired and hungry. "I really enjoyed playing last night, and your piano has such a beautiful tone. I was wondering if maybe I could play here regularly in exchange for meals and maybe a place to sleep." "I don't need much space, just a corner somewhere." Antonio studied her face. There was something about this young woman that he trusted instinctively. Maybe it was the way she had treated his grandfather's piano with such respect, or the way she had seemed genuinely grateful for the simple meal he had offered her. "What about your travels?" he asked. "Don't you have other places to see?" Yuki shrugged. "I've seen enough castles and museums for now. I miss playing music. And honestly, I'm running out of money. I need to find a way to support myself for a while." Antonio made a decision that would change both their lives. "Okay," he said. "You can stay in the small room upstairs. It's where my grandmother used to live. It's simple, but it's clean and comfortable. In exchange, you play music in the evenings when we have customers. Deal?" Yuki's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Really? That would be wonderful. Thank you so much." That evening, word had somehow spread about the talented pianist at Antonio's restaurant. By 7 o'clock, every table was full, something that hadn't happened in over a year. Neighbors who rarely came by had made special dinner plans. A few tourists who had heard rumors from other travelers had found their way to the small restaurant. Yuki had spent the afternoon getting to know the piano better, testing its range and discovering its personality. Every piano was different, she had learned during her years of study, and this one had character. Some keys were slightly more sensitive than others, and the upper register had a particularly sweet tone that reminded her of bells. When she began playing that evening, she chose a mix of classical pieces and popular melodies that would appeal to different tastes. She started with some gentle Mozart to create a pleasant dining atmosphere, then moved to a beautiful Italian song that Antonio had hummed while cooking. The customers were delighted when they recognized the familiar melody transformed by her skilled interpretation. As the evening progressed, people began making requests. The elderly couple from the night before had returned, this time with two friends they had invited to hear the amazing pianist. They asked for some Puccini, and Yuki managed to play a simplified version of O mio babbino caro that brought tears to several people's eyes. A young couple celebrating their anniversary requested something romantic, and Yuki played a gentle arrangement of La Vie en Rose that made them hold hands across the table. A family with teenage children asked for something more modern, and Yuki surprised everyone by playing a beautiful piano version of a popular song they all recognized. Antonio watched from behind the counter, amazed at how Yuki seemed to read the room and adjust her music to match the mood. When people were eating and talking, she played softly in the background. When they finished their meals and were relaxing with wine, she played more elaborate pieces that commanded attention. But what impressed Antonio most was how Yuki interacted with the customers. During her breaks, she would walk around the restaurant, talking to people about the music and taking requests for later in the evening. She was genuinely interested in hearing their stories and learning about their favorite songs. Her warm personality and obvious talent created an atmosphere that felt more like a gathering in someone's home than a commercial restaurant. By the end of the evening, Antonio had served more meals than he had in the previous 3 days combined. But more than that, he could see that his customers were truly happy. They lingered over their desserts, reluctant to leave the magical atmosphere that Yuki's music had created. Several people asked when she would be playing again, and a few even made reservations for the following night. After the last customer left, Antonio and Yuki sat at one of the tables, sharing a late dinner and talking about the evening. "I can't believe how many people came," Antonio said, still somewhat in shock. "Word must have traveled fast," Yuki smiled. "Music has a way of bringing people together. In Japan, we have a saying that music is the language that everyone understands, no matter where they come from. Your Japanese family must miss you," Antonio said. "They must be proud of your talent." Yuki's expression became more serious. "They are proud, but they also worry about practical things. Music is beautiful, but it doesn't always pay the bills. That's part of why I decided to travel, to figure out what I really want to do with my life." Antonio nodded, understanding her dilemma better than she might have expected. "My grandfather always said that the best businesses are the ones that give people something they didn't know they needed. I think that's what happened here tonight." Over the following weeks, their partnership grew stronger. Yuki learned about Italian cooking by helping Antonio in the kitchen during the day. In return, Antonio helped her with her Italian, and she taught him about different styles of music. They developed a routine that worked well for both of them. Yuki would practice in the afternoons when the restaurant was quiet, working on new pieces and arranging popular songs for solo piano. Antonio would listen while he prepared for the evening service, often suggesting songs he thought the customers might enjoy. The restaurant's reputation spread throughout the neighborhood and beyond. Food bloggers started mentioning the charming trattoria with the amazing pianist. Travel websites began recommending it as a must-visit spot for authentic Italian dining with live music. Local newspapers wrote small articles about the unique collaboration between the Italian restaurant owner and the Japanese musician. But for Antonio and Yuki, the success wasn't just about the increased business. They had found something valuable in their partnership, a sense of purpose and community that neither had expected. Antonio rediscovered his love for hospitality, while Yuki found a new way to share her musical gift with the world. Every evening brought new faces and new stories. Yuki's music created a space where strangers felt comfortable talking to each other, where couples rediscovered romance, and where families made memories that would last long after the last note faded away. The dusty old piano that had sat silent in the corner for months had become the heart of the restaurant, beating with music that brought the whole place to life. And the young woman who had knocked on the door asking for food in exchange for a song had become an essential part of Antonio's family business, transforming it into something neither of them could have imagined on their own. 3 weeks after Yuki had first knocked on Antonio's door, their little restaurant had become one of the most talked about places in Rome. Every evening was fully booked, and Antonio had to start taking reservations by phone. People were willing to wait weeks for a table just to hear Yuki play while they enjoyed their dinner. The transformation was remarkable. Antonio had hired 2 part-time servers to help with the increased business, and he was actually making enough money to pay all his bills with some left over. But more importantly, he loved going to work again. Every day brought new challenges and new opportunities to create memorable experiences for his customers. Yuki had settled into her new life with surprising ease. The small room upstairs had become her temporary home, decorated with postcards from her travels and sheet music that she had found in local music shops. She had learned enough Italian to chat comfortably with regular customers, and they had learned enough about music to make more sophisticated requests. One busy Friday evening in October, a distinguished older gentleman sat alone at a corner table, quietly observing the restaurant's atmosphere while enjoying his dinner. He didn't make any requests or draw attention to himself, but Yuki noticed that he listened very carefully to every piece she played. He seemed particularly interested when she performed more challenging classical works after Yuki finished a particularly beautiful rendition of Debussy's Clair de Lune. The gentleman approached the piano during her break. "Excusa me," he said in English with a refined Italian accent. "My name is Professor Martinelli. I teach at the Santa Cecilia Conservatory here in Rome. I've been hearing about your performances and I had to come see for myself." Yuki felt a flutter of nervousness. She had heard of Santa Cecilia. It was one of the most prestigious music schools in Europe. "It's nice to meet you, Professor. I hope you enjoyed your dinner. The food was excellent, but I came here for the music," Professor Martinelli said with a smile. "I have to ask, where did you study? Your technique is remarkable, and your musical interpretation shows real maturity." "I studied at Tokyo College of Music," Yuki replied, "but I took a break from formal study to travel." Professor Martinelli nodded thoughtfully. "Would you be interested in auditioning for our winter masterclass program? We have visiting artists from around the world, and I think you would benefit greatly from the experience. The program starts in January." Yuki was stunned. A few months ago, she had been worried about her musical future. Now one of Europe's most respected music professors was inviting her to audition for an elite program. "I would be honored," she said, "but I'm not sure I can afford the tuition, and I have commitments here at the restaurant." "The program offers scholarships for exceptional students," Professor Martinelli said. "As for your commitments here, perhaps we can work something out. Many of our students perform in venues around the city. This restaurant could be an excellent place for them to gain experience with real audiences." Antonio had been watching this conversation from across the room, and he approached them with curiosity. Professor Martinelli explained the situation, and Antonio's first reaction was pure pride in Yuki's accomplishment. "This is wonderful news," Antonio said. "Of course, we'll figure out how to make it work." Over the following days, Antonio and Yuki discussed the opportunity extensively. The masterclass program would require Yuki to attend classes 3 days a week, but she would still be able to perform at the restaurant on evenings and weekends. Professor Martinelli had also suggested that some of his students could occasionally perform at the restaurant, giving them practical experience and giving Antonio a backup plan for busy nights. But there was another development that made the decision even more complicated. A journalist from one of Rome's major newspapers had heard about the restaurant and wanted to write a feature story about Yuki and Antonio's partnership. The article, when it appeared the following week, was more extensive than either of them had expected. The journalist had interviewed several regular customers, and their quotes painted a picture of how the music had transformed not just the restaurant, but the entire neighborhood. Mrs. Romano, the elderly woman who had been there on Yuki's first night, said that she and her husband now looked forward to their weekly dinner at Antonio's more than anything else. "It's like having a private concert with the best food in Rome," she had told the reporter. A young father mentioned how his teenage daughter, who usually spent dinner staring at her phone, had started requesting piano lessons after hearing Yuki play. Music has become a part of our family conversations again, he said. The article also included quotes from Antonio about how the partnership had saved his struggling business and renewed his passion for hospitality. Yuki didn't just bring music to our restaurant, he was quoted as saying. She brought life back to it. The story generated even more attention than they had anticipated. Food and travel bloggers from other cities started making special trips to Rome just to experience the restaurant. A local television station wanted to do a feature segment. Most surprisingly, several other restaurant owners contacted Antonio to ask if he knew any other talented musicians who might want similar arrangements. This gave Yuki an idea that excited her more than any performance opportunity. During one of their evening conversations, she shared her thoughts with Antonio. "What if we could help create more partnerships like ours?" she said. "I know so many talented musicians who are struggling to find places to perform and ways to support themselves, and I'm sure there are other restaurant owners who would love to add live music to their establishments." Antonio was intrigued. "Like a program that matches musicians with restaurants?" "Exactly. We could help train musicians in how to read an audience and choose appropriate repertoire. We could teach restaurant owners how to incorporate live music into their business model. We could create a network of venues that support live music." The idea grew more elaborate as they discussed it. They could start with just a few restaurants in Rome, helping to establish similar partnerships. If it worked well, they could expand to other cities. Yuki's experience at Santa Cecilia would give her additional credibility and knowledge to make the program even better. Antonio was enthusiastic about the concept. His business background could help with the practical aspects, while Yuki's musical expertise would ensure quality and proper training for the musicians. They decided to start small. Professor Martinelli had already mentioned several students who were looking for performance opportunities. Antonio had made friends with other restaurant owners through his suppliers and local business associations. They could begin by facilitating just a few partnerships and see how well the concept worked. The first trial partnership was with Lorenzo, who owned a small restaurant near the Pantheon, and Elena, a young violinist from Professor Martinelli's advanced class. Antonio and Yuki spent time with both of them, sharing what they had learned about making live music work in a restaurant setting. Elena learned how to choose music that enhanced, rather than overwhelmed, the dining experience. Lorenzo learned how to adjust his restaurant's layout and lighting to accommodate a musician. Most importantly, both learned how to communicate effectively to ensure that their partnership worked well for everyone involved. The trial was successful beyond their expectations. Within 2 weeks, Lorenzo's restaurant was seeing the same kind of increased business and customer enthusiasm that Antonio had experienced. Elena was gaining valuable performance experience and earning enough money to support her studies. Word of their success spread quickly through Rome's music and restaurant communities. Soon, Antonio and Yuki were fielding inquiries from musicians and restaurant owners throughout the city. As winter approached, Yuki prepared for her audition at Santa Cecilia, while continuing to perform regularly at Antonio's restaurant. She was nervous about balancing formal study with her practical work, but she was also excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. The shy young woman who had knocked on a restaurant door asking for food in exchange for music was becoming a confident advocate for other musicians. The struggling restaurant owner was becoming a mentor for other small business owners who wanted to incorporate the arts into their establishments. Their partnership had grown into something much larger than either of them had imagined, a movement that was creating opportunities for musicians and transforming the dining landscape throughout Rome. And they were just getting started. 6 months after Yuki had first walked into Antonio's restaurant, the small trattoria had become something neither of them could have imagined. The walls were now covered with photos from special events, birthday celebrations where Yuki had played the guests' favorite songs, anniversary dinners where couples had danced to her music, and community gatherings where neighbors had come together over food and melodies. Yuki had successfully auditioned for the Santa Cecilia Masterclass program and was thriving in her studies. 3 days a week she worked with world-renowned teachers, perfecting her technique and expanding her repertoire. The other days she continued performing at Antonio's restaurant and working on their growing musician-restaurant partnership program. The program had expanded beyond their wildest dreams. 12 restaurants throughout Rome now hosted regular live music, providing steady income for over 20 musicians. The quality remained high because Antonio and Yuki had developed a careful screening and training process. Musicians learned not just how to perform in restaurants, but how to connect with audiences and create memorable experiences. Professor Martinelli had become an enthusiastic supporter of their program. He regularly recommended his most talented students for restaurant partnerships, and he had even begun incorporating practical performance skills into the conservatory's curriculum. Music education has focused too much on technical perfection and not enough on connecting with real audiences, he told a music education conference. Antonio and Yuki have shown us a different way. But perhaps the most meaningful development for Yuki was the children's music program she had started in the neighborhood. It had begun informally when parents started asking if she could give piano lessons to their children. Yuki realized that many families in the area couldn't afford private music instruction, so she began offering free group lessons on Sunday afternoons at the restaurant. The children's program had grown to include 15 young students between the ages of 6 and 16. They learned on Antonio's grandfather's piano, the same instrument that had started this whole journey. Every few weeks, the children would perform for the restaurant's customers, gaining confidence and experience while adding an extra layer of community connection to the establishment. 8-year-old Lucia was one of Yuki's most dedicated students. She had started with no musical background but showed natural talent and enthusiasm. Her grandmother was Mrs. Romano, the elderly woman who had been there on Yuki's first night. Watching 3 generations of her family connect through music brought tears to Mrs. Romano's eyes every Sunday. Music has brought our whole neighborhood together, Mrs. Romano told a reporter who was writing a follow-up article about the restaurant's success.
Children are learning, parents are socializing, and all of us are enjoying beautiful music with wonderful food.
It's like having a big extended family. The success story had attracted attention far beyond Rome. Restaurant owners and musicians from other Italian cities had visited to learn about their model. A delegation from Barcelona had spent a week observing their operations and was planning to implement a similar program in Spain. Food and music magazines from around Europe had featured articles about their partnership. Most surprisingly, Yuki had received an invitation to speak at an international conference on arts and community development in Vienna. The shy young woman who had once been afraid to ask for food was now being recognized as an innovator in music education and community building. As spring arrived, Antonio and Yuki faced new decisions about their future. Yuki had been offered several performance opportunities that would require traveling, including a summer music festival in Germany and a cultural exchange program that would take her back to Japan for 3 months. "I never expected to have so many choices," Yuki told Antonio one evening as they discussed her options. "A year ago I thought I might have to give up music entirely," Antonio smiled. "You've worked hard for these opportunities. You should take advantage of them. But what about the restaurant? What about our program?" This was the question that had been weighing on both their minds. Their partnership had been so successful that it had created opportunities that threatened to pull them in different directions. The solution came from an unexpected source. Elena, the violinist who had been their first successful placement at Lorenzo's restaurant, approached them with a proposal. She had been watching their program grow and had ideas about how to expand and formalize it. "I'd like to help manage the day-to-day operations," Elena told them. "I've learned so much from working with you both, and I think I could help train new musicians and work with restaurant owners. That would free you up to pursue bigger opportunities while keeping the program running." Elena's offer was perfect timing. She had proven herself to be reliable and talented, and she understood the program's principles from having lived them. With her managing the operational details, Yuki could travel for performances and conferences while still maintaining her connection to the program that had become so important to her. Antonio was enthusiastic about the arrangement. "We started this to help musicians find opportunities," he said. "Now we're creating opportunities for people to become leaders in the field." The transition worked smoothly. Elena moved into the coordinator role while Yuki traveled to Germany for the summer festival. The children's music program continued under Elena's guidance, with Yuki participating via video calls when she was away. The restaurant partnerships kept growing, with new venues joining every month. When Yuki returned from Germany, she brought news that would take their program to an international level. The festival organizers had been so impressed with her presentation about music and community development that they wanted to host a conference, specifically focused on replicating their model in other countries. They're calling it Music Without Borders, Yuki explained excitedly. The idea is to help musicians and restaurant owners in different countries create their own local programs. The conference, held the following spring, brought together musicians, restaurant owners, educators, and community leaders from 12 countries. Participants spent a week learning about the principles that had made Antonio and Yuki's program successful, then returned home to start their own versions. Within 2 years, similar programs were operating in cities across Europe, with new ones starting in Asia and South America. Each program adapted the basic principles to fit local culture and conditions. But the core idea remained the same: bringing musicians and restaurant owners together for mutual benefit and community enhancement. Yuki completed her studies at Santa Cecilia with highest honors and was offered positions with several prestigious orchestras. But she chose a different path. She decided to divide her time between performing, teaching, and developing their musician-restaurant partnership program on an international scale. Antonio's restaurant had become more than a business. It was the headquarters of a movement. The walls now displayed photos and letters from program participants around the world. The old piano where it all started had been carefully restored and was played not just by Yuki, but by a rotating group of accomplished musicians who considered the restaurant their musical home. The transformation was complete but continuing. The struggling restaurant owner who had almost given up on his dream had become a successful businessman and community leader. The talented young musician who had feared for her future had become an international advocate for arts, education, and community development. But perhaps the most important transformation was in how they viewed success. It wasn't just about personal achievement or financial gain. True success, they had learned, came from creating opportunities for others and building communities where people could connect through shared experiences. Every evening, as music filled the small restaurant and customers lingered over their meals, Antonio and Yuki were reminded of the power of taking chances on strangers. The simple act of kindness that had started their partnership, letting a hungry traveler play piano for a meal, had grown into something that was changing lives around the world. The old saying about music being a universal language had proven true in ways they never could have imagined. Through their work, they had discovered that when music, food, and hospitality came together, they created something magical, a sense of belonging that transcended cultural differences and brought out the best in human nature. As the restaurant filled with laughter and conversation and the gentle sound of piano music, Antonio often thought about his grandfather, who had insisted on keeping that old piano even when space was tight and money was scarce. The old man had known something that Antonio was only now beginning to understand. The most valuable things in life aren't always the most practical ones, and sometimes the best investments are the ones that enrich the soul rather than just the bank account. Yuki's journey from struggling traveler to international advocate had taught her that success wasn't about playing in the biggest concert halls or winning the most prestigious competitions. True musical success came from using her talent to create joy, build connections, and open doors for others who shared her passion. Their story had become a legend in Rome and an inspiration around the world. But for Antonio and Yuki,